Jonathan Titus will be our first speaker, and he is a professor of biology at State University at New York, Fredonia, and he teaches biology, ecology, and botany. His research is in plant ecology. And locally, he has set up a network of long-term forests, study plots in wetlands and uplands to understand forest structure and track forest change due to succession, invasive species, and climate change. He serves on the board of the Nature Sanctuary of Western New York and the Research Science Consortium at Presque Isle. Along with his wife Priscilla, he is a steward of Alexander Preserve in Zoar Valley. Along with many dedicated volunteers, he is working to control non-native species invasions in the campus woodlot, College Lodge, and Alexander Preserve. So here's John.
So yes, my name is John Titus. I'm in the biology department at SUNY Fredonia. And so today the topic is genetically modified organisms. So what I want to do first is kind of put the GMO issue into context about why are we talking about this? Why is this such a big issue? So during human history, there have been 4 agricultural revolutions. So the first agricultural revolution was the beginning of agriculture. That's when people transitioned from being hunter-gatherers to becoming farmers. Then the second agricultural revolution was the Columbian Exchange, and that was the mixing up of the world's flora and fauna and microorganisms. That's when other species really began to be dispersed all over the planet. And this is still really going on today, right? All kinds of species from Asia and whatnot show up here and vice versa because we carry them. The third agricultural revolution was the Green Revolution. And that was the development of pesticides, fertilizers, modern irrigation, modern agricultural machinery, things like that, and also the development of scientific plant breeding. This is the development of highly productive breeds that are responsive to fertilizers, right? So this all started after World War II and is still very much underway. And so because of the Green Revolution, there was both, of course, pluses and minuses like anything, but because of that, there is certainly more than enough food in the world. And food shortages occur for other reasons, not because of a lack of food. So then the fourth agricultural revolution is genetically modified organisms. So this started in 1973, was commercialized in 76, and it's a very corporate-driven revolution as opposed to the others. So the reason GMOs are big is because this is one of 4 agricultural revolutions in human history. So anyway, what I'm going to try to do is explain what a GMO is and a little bit about how they are made, a little bit about how GMOs are different than hybrids, and a few other issues like that. So a GMO is any organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. And so to say that a different way, a GMO is an organism that possesses a novel combination of genetic material. And this novel combination was attained through the use of modern biotechnology. So this combination of genetic material is unlike anything that's ever been seen before. So what happens with genetic engineering is that genes are inserted into an organism's genome. So that's the most common way. It can also be the deletion or mutation of genes in the genome. The genome is all the genes that you have, all of your DNA. So most GMOs are when you take a gene from another organism, right? And this gene to be inserted or genes to be inserted are from very different unrelated species. So how do you do this? How do you take a bunch of genes from one organism completely unrelated and put them into another? So this can happen a bunch of different ways. You can use a gene gun. It's not really a gun, but anyway, what it does is it takes that extra DNA, puts it right into the nucleus of the target cell, right? They also have tiny syringes. These are really small syringes. And then you can also use an electrical pulse. But more commonly, the way it's done is that you insert the gene or genes that you want to move to a virus or a bacteria, and then the virus or bacteria then penetrates the target cell and does the work for you and adds those genes to the target cell genes. Actually, this process does happen naturally in nature. For example, there are some bacteria which transfer genes to plants, thereby creating the tumors. Those are some of our plant diseases. And there are many viruses that transfer genes to plants, animals, and bacteria. So this natural mechanism is exploited in this process. So, all right. That's basically how it's done, about that long. And so let's back up a little now and make sure that we are clear on what selective breeding is. So humans began domesticating plants and animals about 15,000 years ago, a long time ago, maybe longer ago than that. And they used selective breeding. And that is this, you're probably kind of familiar with this, right? You take an organism with traits that you want, with characteristics that you want, and therefore it has the genes you want. And you use that to breed the next generation. And individuals that don't have the traits you want, you don't breed those. So we've been doing that for a long time. Think about something like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. They're all the same species. Those were all created through natural selection, through artificial selection, right, by humans deciding which plants they will breed and which plants they will not. So this process, however, depends upon naturally occurring genetic variation within a species. And it can only happen between closely related species or within a species, of course, right? Because if it's between closely related species, they have to be able to breed. This is different than genetic engineering because that involves a transfer of genes between very different species. Today, selective breeding is much more rapid and sophisticated than it was in the past because we use modern technology. So today, if you buy a packet of seeds, right, it's often called a hybrid. And so what they've done is just crossed two parents in a controlled environment. So there's no other pollen or genetic contamination. And then the seeds are collected and sold to you. And these hybrids may produce faster or be more disease resistant. And then the seed companies do have proprietary ownership of these varieties, right? And these varieties will not breed true. So you have to buy new seeds each year for these particular varieties. So what makes GMOs a global change event is that the process shatters the rules of evolution. This is something that's never happened before. Genes are moved between totally unrelated species. And this is a painstaking process. It's not easy. Developing a GMO takes years. So one thing also that I hope that you can get through this, what I talk about through the rest of this, is that unlike issues like global climate change, where there's uniformity across the scientific establishment, the scientific establishment is very divided about GMOs. So there's no kind of unity of opinion, unlike a lot of these other kind of global change factors. So the first organisms to be modified were bacteria, and this is because of their relatively simple genetics. And bacteria continue to be important for experiments in genetic engineering. And so today, GMO bacteria are used for several purposes, especially for producing large amounts of pure human protein to use in medicine. For example, insulin is produced in genetically modified bacteria, and also clotting factors to treat hemophilia. And then we also use GMO microorganisms to make enzymes for food manufacture. For example, alpha amylase, you know how that's what they use to convert starch to sugars. It's producing GMO bacteria. Also chymosin from GMO bacteria or GMO fungi, and that's used in cheese making. So lots of kind of uses there. So let's move on to plants now. And GMO plants have also been used to produce various kinds of pharmaceuticals. For example, there's a GMO carrot, which produces the drug I can't even say this word, Elicio. Sorry, I would not name a drug that. It's too hard for me to pronounce. Anyway, that treats Gaucher's disease. And so, they're also used in pharmaceuticals. And then there's also algae, jatropha, maize, and poplars have been genetically modified for biofuels. So, however, I think most of the controversy surrounding GMOs is not about what I've touched on already. Most of the controversy is about their use in food. And this is because they're eaten and also they're raised out of doors. So, what are some of the things that genetically modified organisms, have been developed for? The main one is for resistance to herbicides. So that's a big one. That is the main food GMOs. Also resistance to pests, increased nutritional value, extended product shelf life, and new colors, to name a few. So GMOs under development. Also, they're not finished yet, but other things they're working on for crops with enhanced oil content, and they're able to grow in conditions such as drought or high salinity. The world's most common GMOs are Monsanto's Roundup-Ready corn and soybeans. That's about 90% of the corn and soybeans out there in this country. So what does Roundup-Ready mean? That means that you can spray your field with Roundup and your crop plant does not die, but all the other weeds die. So it's tolerant of the herbicide. There's also, where else? Where was I? Okay. There's also a BT corn, which is also quite common. And so what they did for this is they took a gene from a bacteria, BT is the name of the bacteria, and they put that in the corn. This bacteria is toxic to the corn borer. So then you put that in the corn, and then the corn itself is toxic to the corn borer. It's because that gene produces a protein that's toxic to the corn borer. That's quite common. Yeah, so those are pretty much the common ones. One thing, that I wanted to add is, where did they find a gene that could tolerate Roundup? Where did they find that? Does anybody have a guess? Where would you look?
Soil.
Where?
Bacteria.
At Monsanto. Where at Monsanto would you look? They produce the pesticide, so where would you look?
Soil.
In their wastewater. Exactly. You find bacteria, of course, because the bacteria are evolving through, that would be natural selection though, right? They become resistant to this and they can tolerate it, so you take your gene out of there. All right. So today we have GMO cassava with lower cyanogen glucosides and more protein. As you know, cassava has to be treated before you can eat it. Ring spot virus resistant papaya. Roundup-Ready bent grass. That is for golf course putting greens, right? So that you can just go out and spray your putting green with Roundup and you don't have to dig anything up. We have blue roses and more. So what are some of the recent things that have happened? Well, GMO loblolly pine with greater wood density. That, loblolly pine is planted throughout the South for paper production mostly. But to make a GMO loblolly pine with greater wood density, they took genes from Monterey pine, sweet gum, mouse ear cress, and E. coli bacteria and inserted those into the loblolly pine genome. So that's now being planted. The USDA determined they did not have authority to regulate that particular GMO. And then the non-browning apple, called the Arctic apple. What is apple browning? That means when you cut it, it starts to turn brown. So that was approved by the USDA last week. So genes from a virus, a bacteria, and an altered gene sequence from apples were used in this new apple, in this GMO apple. Also, some GMOs have been withdrawn from the shelves. An example is the Flavor Saver tomato. That didn't work out. That had an enhanced shelf life. Golden rice with enhanced Vitamin A from daffodils. That was a gene from daffodils. That's also not moving forward. And Monsanto's new leaf potato with a gene that produced a toxin that repelled the Colorado potato beetle and leaf rolled virus, which would presumably reduce farmers' needs for pesticides. That potato was briefly used by McDonald's for French fry production, but apparently there was consumer backlash, and those GMOs, that GMO was not produced anymore. Many more GMOs are currently under development. So now I want to move to animals. So there are already genetically modified fish, mice, rats, rabbits, sheep, and pigs. Why have GMO animals? Well, a bunch of reasons. First, for human disease research, such as Parkinson's and Huntington's, using gene therapy. So you use genetically modified organisms for that research. Another is the development of malaria and dengue-resistant mosquitoes. For example, they released a mosquito GMO mosquitoes into the Caymans, and that reduced the dengue mosquito carrying population by about 80%. So also this research goes for disease resistance in livestock also. You use GMO animals to produce products such as fiber. You might not know this, right? But goats have been genetically engineered to produce milk with strong spider web-like proteins in their milk. And this is harvested from their milk. You also produce pharmaceuticals. This is happening a lot. So, for example, there's an anticoagulant which reduces the probability of blood clots during surgery, and this is extracted from goat's milk. You can also, this is ongoing, is produce tissues and organs for implantation. So they want to produce human organs in pigs mostly. That's ongoing. To enhance animals' interactions with humans, such as hypoallergenic pets, right? And also food production and food quality. Faster growing fish, pigs that digest food more efficiently, cow milk that is like human milk. It's an interesting one. And faster growing salmon. With the faster growing salmon, Aqua Bounty, a biotech company, will be bringing a GMO salmon to market which can mature in half the time it takes non-GMO salmon and achieve twice the size. So for the last part, I have this kind of potential benefits and potential risks of GMOs. Right? We've only been here since 1973, so of course a lot of it's still potential. And this pluses and minuses, if you don't have one, hopefully somebody next to you has one, is only based on the food aspects, because the other parts the other aspects of GMOs I think is very different in terms of potential benefits in GMOs. So we're focusing on food. So the first part would be this debate about healthier food or unhealthy food. So in terms of healthier food, not yet. So the crops with increased nutrients have not been successful. So for example, golden rice was the poster child for this with enhanced vitamin A. This was to be used in developing countries where kids get blind because they're not getting vitamin A. Why did this fail? Anybody have any ideas? Why did vitamin A, it sounds like, oh yeah, rice with more vitamin A in it. Kids will eat it, they won't go blind. I gave a hint in the next sentence. These people don't have access to food anyway. There is not a food shortage on the planet. If you have money to buy food, you can buy lots of good foods in the market that have vitamin A. So vitamin A enriched golden rice doesn't work because they don't have access to food anyway. So then there's Aqua Bounty salmon, where the idea is to produce quality salmon, high quality salmon protein. This will grow very fast. We'll see what happens because you can't grow a salmon from nothing. They're protein eaters, right? So that protein to feed these salmon has to come from somewhere. And that's part of the question, is where they're going to get that protein. So have GMOs created unhealthy foods? Well, studies have been really conflicting, right? So between direct unhealthy results from GMOs. So there's been, we don't want to go into that, but people have argued about those studies and whatnot. However, it's not argued that GMO corn has certainly increased the preponderance of people eating high fructose corn syrup and corn-fed beef, and those are not healthy. And of course, Roundup is dangerous to your health. So those are kind of related, though. It's not the direct GMO food itself. How about more food? Well, in terms of more food, the Green Revolution caused the world to have more than enough food. Right? Countries like India are food exporters. Food shortages are caused by politics and poverty, not by a lack of food. Also, cheaper food is not a goal. Food is already too cheap for farmers to support themselves. And this is a major reason for worldwide poverty, because food prices are too cheap. And less food is not an issue, really. How about less pesticide use? That would be a good goal for GMOs. Unfortunately, that hasn't really happened yet because Roundup is used a lot more now. So pesticide use is increased. Also, BT corn has not reduced the use of pesticides. Both of these crops, so Roundup-Ready crops and BT corn, has spawned the creation of resistant pests, in case of Roundup-resistant weeds and BT-resistant corn borers. New leaf potato, maybe that would have reduced pesticide use in potatoes. We're not sure because it was withdrawn. And then we'll see what happens with ring spot virus-resistant papaya. In Hawaii is the test case for that. It's a relatively new GMO. So more pesticide use is the case so far from GMOs. How about fertilizer use? Well, there's potential for this. This is one of the reasons that people were excited about GMOs. So far, that has not happened. This is because GMO crops are not tough, and they need fertilizers to produce. How about increased resistance to drought and salinity? This was also another one of the big appeals of GMO crops, is to develop crops that can deal with tough weather. So far, that has not happened. Why is this? Well, if you think about the corporate kind of basis of genetically modified organisms, farmers subjected to drought and saline soils are generally poor. So there hasn't been much research on this because of the lack of economic stimuli. Happier farmers. This was something that people were really hoping would happen. So GMOs have basically increased farm debt, unfortunately, that's a rough one, and caused a rash of farmer suicides, especially in India. Those who violate GMO seed patents by growing their own seed, because of course you can't grow your own seed, that's how Monsanto makes their money, right? They sell you the seed every year. Those people are tracked down and prosecuted. And then corporate farmers have increased their holdings. So generally, poorer farmers and sadder farmers is where we're at today. How about less corporate control of the food supply? Unfortunately, not yet. Monsanto's goal, and this is stated, this is not secret, is they do want to control the world's food supply. Not a secret, right? And so one thing that's interesting is that both sides in the scientific community, both sides of the debate do think that GMO should be labeled. That's across the board, whether you're for GMOs or against GMOs. So this is a tribute to the power of Monsanto that we do not have labeling. How about more genetic diversity of the world's crops? Unfortunately, no. It's kind of like we're too much on the right side of the page. I want to be on the left side of the page. But anyway, GMOs are accelerating the dangerous trend of extremely low genetic diversity. People need to remember the potato famine. There's a reason to have genetic diversity. And how about increased food shelf life? There is the potential there, definitely. And but the flavor saver tomato was withdrawn, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't really know anything about that tomato, but it didn't work, obviously. So to decrease food shelf life, it hasn't made any difference yet. Food appearance. If you hate browning in your apples, apparently we're there. Okay. So whatever. I'm not that concerned about browning in apples, though. Anyway, and blue roses. So on the back, there's a rundown of a couple of environmental issues, because I got to wrap things up here. So anyway, what about good for the environment? Well, there is definitely potential. That was part of the idea of GMOs in the early days. I think some of the early scientists were very excited about this, for the potentials to use less pesticides, have less irrigation, use less fertilizer. And that hasn't been the case so far. So a couple of points are things like, in ecology, everything escapes. This is a fundamental in ecology. So genes often jump. Because we're humans, we don't think about that too much, but genes do jump both from genetically modified organisms, the wild type, and between closely related species. For example, the Roundup-Ready genes in that GMO bent grass and those putting greens has escaped to wild bent grass and other related species. It's already done that. And species will continue to jump. Many GMO plants have wind-blown pollen, so the pollen is spread very widely. And of course, apples are pollinated by insects. People are also worried about this, right, because those genes will get around. So this creates a lot of tension between neighboring farm fields, organic farmers, and whatnot because of the contamination of their stocks. A few other points. GMO corn pollen that contains the Bt bacterial gene, toxic to caterpillars, blows into adjacent fields and coats the plants there. Is this toxic to the caterpillars if it's in the pollen? So research on this has been inconclusive so far, right? The concern is the monarch, but also a lot of other species. So why has the monarch been in the news recently? Hopefully you've seen that, right? 1 million monarchs have died. One of the main reasons for this is because of Roundup-Ready corn and soybeans. What happens is that historically, there were a lot of weeds around on the edges of fields and whatnot. Because you can spray Roundup so widely, those plants are gone. So the host plants for monarchs and, of course, many, many, many other insect species are gone. So this creates problems, for all these insect species. And that's why monarchs, are being talked about for endangered species lists now. How about superweeds? Well, these have already occurred from Roundup-Ready and Bt-resistant corn. Superweeds are nothing new, right? It's just another dimension in superweeds. So we'll see how that goes, right? And lastly, the review of GMO plants by not just USDA, but also by FDA and EPA is inadequate. This is also uniform across the board in science. People who actually are supporters also agree that the review process is not adequate. And one of the reasons for this is if you ever see one of those graphics about where people from Monsanto work, they're in every agency. It's really remarkable. USDA, FDA, EPA, Monsanto people are in powerful positions. Anyway, that's it. Hope I didn't take too long. So